Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, May 31st, 2022. President Joe Biden meeting with the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell in the White House Oval Office discussing how to bring down high inflation. The president calls it his number one priority and says his plan starts with a simple proposition: respect the Fed. The Federal Reserve has started raising interest rates to deal with inflation, but there are concerns it might lead to a recession. Funerals beginning for the 19 children and 2 teachers shot to death at a school in Uvalde, Texas by a lone gunman. And while the U.S. House and Senate are not in session in Washington, D.C. this week, a group of Democratic and Republican senators are meeting virtually today to continue discussing possible bipartisan responses to reduce gun violence. European Union plans to end almost all of its imports of oil from Russia, latest response to Russia's brutal war against Ukraine. And Democratic lawyer in the U.S., Michael Sussman, found not guilty of making a false statement to the FBI. It's the first trial from Special Counsel John Durham's investigation into the origins of the Russia investigation. That was the allegation of coordination between Russia and Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. We start with inflation. In April in the U.S., it was 8.3% compared to a year earlier. It's been easing in recent months, but still near levels not seen in 40 years. President Joe Biden in a Wall Street Journal op-ed today writing, "We now have a chance to build on a historic recovery with an economy that works for working families. The most important thing we can do now to transition from rapid recovery to stable, steady growth is to bring inflation down. That is why I have made tackling inflation my top economic priority." President Biden laying out 3 steps in that op-ed to handle high inflation, and Brian Deese, his National Economic Council Director, explaining them during an early morning interview on CNBC.
The economy we have right now is in a transition from this period of historic economic growth to a period that can be more stable, resilient growth. That requires focusing on inflation and doing so from a position of relative strength. The U.S. is in a better position than other countries to do so, in part because of the strength of our labor market recovery, the strength of household balance sheets. So that goes to the 3 steps the president laid out. The first is give the Fed the independence and the space that it needs to operate. That is not something that we can take for granted, particularly given past presidents' actions, and the president today will make very clear that that is what he intends to do. The second is to lower costs, make things more affordable for families during this transition period, and we are taking every step that we can to do so. Releasing oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, as you mentioned, building more affordable housing supply, reducing internet bills, growing more crops in the U.S. to increase supply of food and bring down prices. All of those are steps that we can take right now. And the third is about bringing down the federal deficit. That will reduce price pressures. We've made a lot of progress on that front. Deficit down $1.5 trillion so far this year. We can do more. We need Congress's help on that front, but that's going to be our priority.
Brian Deese, White House National Economic Council Director, on CNBC this morning. That third part of the president's plan, reducing the federal deficit, includes, according to the president's Wall Street Journal op-ed, common sense reforms to the tax code. As Brian Deese mentioned, President Biden meeting this afternoon with the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell in the White House Oval Office.
I have a very brief statement. First, I want to begin by congratulating you, Mr. Chairman, on your recent confirmation of the second term, along with Drs. Brainerd and Cook and Jefferson, recent confirmations. And I'm meeting with Chairman today and Secretary Yellen to discuss my top priority, and that is addressing inflation and in order to transition from historic recovery to a steady growth that works for American families. Excuse me. And my plan is to address inflation. It starts with a simple proposition: respect the Fed, respect the Fed's independence, which I have done and will continue to do. My job as president is not to not only nominate highly qualified individuals for that institution, but to give them the space they need to do their job. I'm not going to interfere with their critically important work. The Fed has dual responsibilities: 1, full employment; 2, stable prices. Chair Powell and other leaders of the Fed have noted at this moment they have a laser focus on addressing inflation, just like I am. And with a larger complement of board members now confirmed, I know we'll use those tools in monetary policy to address the rising prices for the American people. So I look forward to Chairman Powell's continued leadership at the Fed, and I look forward to the Senate considering my final nominee to the board, Michael Barr, in the near future. And that's why we're meeting, folks, and thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Mr. President, why do you think there is such high inflation?
Thank you. Come on, let's go. Come on, guys. Thank you. Let's go. Thank you. Let's go. Come on, guys. Let's go. Thank you. Let's go. Thank you. Thank you. Let's go. Come on, you guys. Let's go. Thank you. Let's go. Come on, guys. Let's go.
President Joe Biden, and as he mentioned, the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen in the White House Oval Office, meeting with the Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell today. Larry Summers is former National Economic Council Director under former President Barack Obama and former Treasury Secretary under former President Bill Clinton. Larry Summers has been critical of both President Biden for championing increased spending during the COVID-19 pandemic, which Summers predicted would lead to high inflation, and Fed Chair Powell for not responding quickly and forcefully enough to the signs that inflation was not going to be transitory. Larry Summers today giving his take on the plan from President Biden.
I think that the president's column today in the Wall Street Journal articulated the right broad principles, that inflation is now our preeminent short-run economic problem, that it has to take priority over other problems, that the first part of any strategy for it has to be monetary policy, that the president has to respect the independence of the Federal Reserve as the Federal Reserve does what's necessary to contain inflation. Frankly, it's been my view that the Fed was way slow to recognize the gravity of the gathering inflation storm, even though there was substantial evidence of it. But I've been heartened in recent weeks and even the last several months by Chairman Powell's statements about the importance and centrality of inflation. I think the question is going to come in terms of policy going forward. I think the right presumption is that you have to increase interest rates by more than inflation has gone up if you want to have any prospect of containing inflation. And inflation has gone up a lot. It depends on what measure you use. You could find measures where it's gone up 7%. I think that's an exaggeration. But it's hard to find a measure where inflation's gone up less than 3 or 4 percentage points. And I think that's the kind of increase in interest rates that at a minimum we're going to need if we're going to have a prospect of containing inflation. Unless, of course, the economy heads towards recession on its own, which, given the turbulence in the stock market and given some of the disturbing indicators about consumer confidence, is also a possibility. But I think that we need to recognize that a soft landing is going to be very difficult in these circumstances.
Larry Summers served under the past 2 Democratic presidents as National Economic Council Director for Barack Obama and Treasury Secretary for Bill Clinton. More on the president's plan to fight inflation. We're joined by White House reporter Alex Gangitano. Thanks so much for being here. What is the president's plan?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So early this morning, a Wall Street Journal op-ed came out with the president outlining his plan for inflation. And what's interesting about the plan is it's not a lot of new things. It's really an acknowledgement of what the White House has been prioritizing for a while now, but it kind of shows this renewed focus that the president has on combating inflation. We actually heard from White House officials today that June is going to mark like a big month-long effort to focus on lowering prices. So what's actually inside of this plan that he put out is, first off, an acknowledgement that the Federal Reserve has the primary responsibility to control inflation. And of course, that came out hours before the president sat down with Chairman Jerome Powell to discuss inflation. The second part of it was the most comprehensive part, which is basically making goods more affordable for Americans and, how quickly they can do that. Of course, that involved the White House once again mentioning the Russia invasion into Ukraine as part of the reason why gas prices are so high. They also talked about fixing supply chains and called on Congress to do things like lower the price of prescription drugs and lower the cost of child and elder care as a way to also help families in the U.S. during rising prices. And the third part involved reducing the federal deficit through common sense reforms to the tax code. So, again, these are things that, we've heard from the White House before, but it was really an outline to show that the president is focused on this, and this is a huge domestic priority for him.
Why do you think the White House would need to show that the president is focused on this?
That's a good question. I think timing is really a huge part of this. High inflation has really been plaguing his approval numbers, and the midterm elections are quickly approaching. And I think that high inflation is going to be a huge challenge for Democrats coming up in November. And so politically, this is a time for them to show that they're doing something about this, that they're focused on it. And also part of the president's op-ed included information about what the White House has done and kind of accomplishments that the Democrats have had, which of course plays into the timing ahead of the midterm election. And that included things like the low unemployment numbers right now, and also the strong household budget sheets. So the fact that their U.S. households have stronger saving and less debt than they did during the pandemic.
We're talking with Alex Gangitano from The Hill. You said that part one of the plan is to acknowledge that the Federal Reserve has the primary responsibility, or as the president is saying, respect the Fed. But critics may say that that's just passing the buck.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, a large focus of his meeting with Powell today, once we heard about what came out of that Oval Office meeting, was again, we need to respect the Fed. We need to respect the Fed's independence. And it, could seem like, well, there's not a lot that the White House can do. This is really the responsibility of the Fed. And that's a lot of what the White House has been saying now for months when it comes to inflation, that they can do as much as they can, but they're kind of boxed in because it's up to the Fed to really take action here. But I think him also pointing to the independence of the Fed and giving them, space to do their work is kind of played up because the former president, Trump, which the White House and Biden brings up a lot, kind of was combative with the Fed. And so I think they're also trying to show a contrast with the former administration and say, our economic policies involve respect for the Fed, unlike, my predecessor. So it's an interesting balance here of how they're bringing in the way that they believe the Fed is independent.
And finally, as the Federal Reserve is taking steps to try to bring down inflation, principally raising interest rates, some concern about the U.S. entering a recession. How is the White House addressing that, if at all?
That's a good question. So Brian Deese just joined us in the White House briefing moments ago and was asked about that. When can the White House has been saying essentially that inflation is transitory and that, they won't say if a recession is bound to happen or not. And they're still kind of backing away from that concept that, historically a recession follows high inflation. But the White House is not really acknowledging that, and they're still sticking to their talking points that this is transitory and that the U.S. is in a position of strength right now because of things like low unemployment, so that they can combat inflation quickly, and we might not see a recession in the future.
Alex Gangitano, White House reporter for The Hill. Find her stories at thehill.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wall Street today, the Dow down 222, NASDAQ down 49, S&P down 26. Inflation running high in Europe as well as Russia's war in Ukraine increases energy and food prices. Euro area annual inflation expected to hit 8.1% in May. That's up from 7.4% in April, according to an estimate from Eurostat. Still, as Associated Press writes, in the most significant effort yet to punish Russia for its war in Ukraine, the European Union agreed to ban the overwhelming majority of Russian oil imports after tense negotiations that tested how far the bloc is willing to go to ostracize Moscow. In a move unthinkable just months ago, EU leaders agreed late Monday to cut around 90% of all Russian oil imports over the next 6 months. Currently, EU imports about 35% of its oil imports from Russia. Today, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and the European Council President Charles Michel asked at a news conference in Brussels, Belgium, during a council meeting about whether even more could have been done, or at least more quickly.
Yes, thank you very much, Yuri Shiko, Ukrainian service of Deutsche Welle. I have a question first about the embargo on oil. It, of course, is great that the EU reached this deal, but if we look at the message it sends to Russia, it looks like it says to Russia that Russia has still time, 6-8 more months to continue destroying Ukraine till the embargo enters into force. And it says like Russia has all this time in order to find other buyers for this oil. So my question is, which message do you see it sends to Russia, and how it helps to stop war now?
I think we have to look at 2 points. It is a wind down period in 6 to 8 months till the end of the year. So it's not an abrupt and full speed supply during that time and then abrupt end, but a clear reduction of oil already. One figure I have on the top of my head is, for example, Germany told us that since the beginning of the year, where they started with 35% Russian oil, they are already down to 12% Russian oil. This shows that by just working hard on not renewing contracts, finishing contracts, and looking at other suppliers, you can fill this wind down period much better. And most importantly, in the back is, of course, the whole big package of 6 sanctions. And these sanctions are biting hard and are really destroying, and that's the goal, the basis, the financial basis of Putin leading this war, and hitting hard the Russian economy.
I would also say a few words about that important question, because I think that when we were in Versailles a few weeks ago, not many observers would have thought that it would have been possible for us only in a few weeks to take such a concrete and strong decision. We have decided to sanction Russia by banning Russian oil. This is extremely important. And we will succeed in the following months to implement that decision. And Ursula is right when she said that it will break the financing of the Russian war machine. This is our goal. And we have 2 tools that we are using as much as we can. On the one hand, we support Ukraine with military equipment, with financial support, with material, with political support as much as we can. Also, when we engage with third countries in order to have more support at the international level, point 1. And point 2, we have decided on 5 packages of sanctions. And the last one was that we have decided yesterday was more difficult, because this is about energy. And energy is a big topic, it's a big thing for the member states, for the households, for the families, for the businesses. And that's why we have decided to work on solutions, on concrete solutions, in order to make sure that the decisions we are taking are painful for Russia, for the Kremlin. This is our main goal.
Charles Michel is European Council President, a news conference alongside the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in Brussels, Belgium, part of the European Council summit happening now. Russia has been promising to find other countries willing to buy its oil if Europe cuts off its purchases, and Reuters are reporting that India has received 34 million barrels of discounted Russian oil since Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th. and that's more than 3 times the value of total imports from Russia, including other products, compared with the same period in 2021. As Russia presses its attacks in Ukraine, mostly now in the east and southern part of that country, and the U.S. continues to pour in military equipment to help Ukraine with the fight, the Pentagon is assessing lessons from the war so far, nearing 100 days. U.S. Army Secretary Christine Wormuth speaking today in Washington, D.C. at the Atlantic Council.
First, if you look at the Russian military's failures, I think it underscores the importance of leadership, training, and discipline. The Russians do not train like us. They don't have an NCO corps, which is, I think, a very significant competitive advantage for the United States. And I think the terrible civilian atrocities that you've seen some of the Russian military commit is directly due to the lack of leadership, training, and discipline that they appear to have in their ranks. And again, I think, for us, you would not see that because we have an NCO corps that is really the backbone of the force for the U.S. Army. Something else you see, I think the Russians really struggling with is delegating responsibilities down to lower echelons. That is something the United States Army does extremely well. It's one of our strengths. And I think you've seen, the Russians struggle to adapt and show initiative on the battlefield. That is another place, I think, where the U.S. Army is doing very well. A third lesson is logistics, logistics, logistics. You often hear the expression, amateurs do strategy and professionals do logistics. I think everything we're seeing right now in Ukraine certainly underscores that. You can be the best equipped military in the world, but if you can't sustain your forces, it doesn't matter. And the Russians have displayed a notable and somewhat surprising deficiency in this area. But I think this is also a strength for the U.S. Army, but nevertheless, given the distances that would be involved in the Indo-Pacific, I think it underscores that we have really got to focus on how do we provide logistics effectively in a contested environment like the one we know we would face in the future. And that's one of the reasons, for example, that we're investing in more modernized watercraft so that we will be able to move supplies and personnel around the Pacific where you see just incredibly vast distances. Another lesson I think you see coming out of what's happening in Ukraine is the importance of secure communications and the consequences of when soldiers use their cell phones, whether it's because that's just everyone is used to using cell phones or because secure communication systems and radios are not working. When soldiers use unencrypted comms, that makes them targetable. And I think, we are going to have to think about that. Certainly most of our young soldiers are used to having their phones with them everywhere they go. But more broadly, I think it speaks to the fact that we're going to have to look at how can we reduce our signatures, the signatures of our formations on the battlefield as much as possible, because the battlefield of the future will be highly transparent. Two last lessons I would highlight. One, everything we're seeing in Ukraine underscores again the growing drone threat, something we saw in Nagorno-Karabakh as well. Drones and other unmanned systems are going to pose significant challenges for us. Again, part of why we're looking at modernizing our air and missile defense systems. And I would say drones are an issue not just overseas, but here at home as well. We, the Army, have been appointed the executive agent for the Joint Counter Unmanned Aerial Systems Office at the Department of Defense. We're working hard on this, but there's quite a bit more work to do. And then lastly, I would just say everything we're seeing in Ukraine underscores the importance of maintaining our industrial base and our munition stockpiles. Again, munitions are going to be very important in the future, particularly if we get into a protracted conflict. We've just signed contracts with a couple of our major industry partners to begin replenishing our stocks of javelins and stingers. And we're also talking with industry more broadly about, what can we do to think about stockpiling some of the longer lead items that we may have in some of our critical munitions in the future.
The Army Secretary Christine Wormuth today at the Atlantic Council. You can find the full program. We covered it all on C-SPAN at our video library at cspan.org. Inside Defense writing about this appearance, saying the Army will continue to have an enhanced posture in Europe even after the current Russia-Ukraine conflict ends, Service Secretary Christine Wormuth said Tuesday. but added the Defense Department will need to decide whether that force will be permanent or rotational. The Army previously announced a replacement of its existing 48,000 troops in Europe, and that number will likely stay the same for at least the next several months, Wormuth said. Another story from Reuters. Protesters in several cities in Iran chanted anti-government slogans overnight, including "Death to Khamenei," referring to the supreme leader, over a deadly building collapse in the southwest of the country. Videos posted on social media showed. Some reaction from the U.S. State Department in Washington and the spokesman Ned Price.
Since last week when a tall building collapsed, and so far about 40 corpses have been pulled out, demonstrations, people have been demonstrating, and by now there are dozens of cities following suit with the people of Abadan. There's a number of slogans and chants that keep being repeated in different demonstrations every now and then, but one stands out that is being repeated again and was repeated yesterday, that translation of which is our enemy is right here, they lie, that it is America. Do you have any comments, any messages to the Iranian people who are chanting this slogan? They're saying their own establishment is lying to them and that America is not the Iranian people's enemy?
We have spoken very clearly about the ongoing protests in Iran. We have also, in the past, spoken directly to the people of Iran. Last year, when we first addressed what were then what started as protests over water shortages and, of course, evolved from there, we sent a very clear message to the Iranian people that remains true today. It was a message of the fact that we stand with you, we stand with the Iranian people who are trying to make their voices heard, and then we call on the Iranian government to respect the right of the Iranian people to peaceful protest and not to repress what are their fundamental demands. This is a message that, of course, applies not only to the people of Iran, the right to peaceful assembly, the right to peaceful protest, the right to freedom of expression. These are universal rights that apply equally to the Iranian people as they do to any other people around the world. We will continue to stand for those rights with those people voicing those rights who are doing so peacefully, consistent with their rights.
The U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price. As the U.S. is continuing negotiations with European countries about whether to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal from 2015 with Iran, today the United Nations Nuclear Agency, the IAEA, or International Atomic Energy Agency, reporting that Iran has accumulated enough enriched uranium to build a nuclear bomb, and that Iran has failed to provide credible explanations about nuclear material found at several sites in recent years. A story at ABC News, a Democrat-linked lawyer charged by Special Counsel John Durham with lying to the FBI in 2016 was found not guilty by a federal jury in Washington on Tuesday, following a nearly 2-week trial that served as the first in-court test of Durham's more than 3-year investigation into the Russia probe. Michael Sussman was charged by Durham last year for allegedly bringing forward a tip to a senior FBI official in September 2016 about a potential connection between computer servers for then-presidential candidate Donald Trump's company and Russia's Alfa Bank, and lying about who he was representing at the time. Through multiple days of witness testimony and evidence exhibits displayed in the D.C. District Court, Durham's prosecutors sought to convince the jury that Sussman brought the info to then FBI General Counsel James Baker as part of Sussman's work for Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign and a technology company executive who had worked on assembling the data. Some reporting from ABC News. Well, after the verdict, again not guilty, Sussman spoke with reporters outside the courtroom in Washington.
Good afternoon. I have a few thoughts to share now that the trial has ended. First, I told the truth to the FBI, and the jury clearly recognized that with their unanimous verdict today. I'm grateful to the members of the jury for their careful and thoughtful service. Despite being falsely accused, I'm relieved that justice ultimately prevailed in my case. As you can imagine, this has been a difficult year for my family and me. But right now, we are just grateful for the love and support of so many during this ordeal, and I'm looking forward to getting back to the work that I love. Finally, I want to thank my legal team at Latham & Watkins, Sean Berkowitz, Michael Bosworth, Natalie Rayo, and Catherine Yao. They're the finest lawyers, and they work tirelessly on my case. Thank you.
Mr. Sussman, what's next for you?
Michael Sussman outside the courthouse in Washington, D.C., after being found not guilty in the Durham probe trial, not taking any questions. Some reaction from former President Donald Trump, posting on his conservative social network, the one he founded, Truth Social. He writes, "Our legal system is corrupt. Our judges and justices are highly partisan, compromised, or just plain scared. Our borders are open. Our elections are rigged. Inflation is rampant. Gas prices and food costs are through the roof. Our military leadership is woke. Our country is going to hell, and Michael Sussman is not guilty." Washington Today continues in a minute.
Here are some of the live events coming up on C-SPAN Radio on Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern. Ukrainian ambassador to the United Nations, Sergei Kyslytsya, is interviewed by the Washington Post about the ongoing invasion of his country by Russia. 11 a.m. Eastern, Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack talks about food production and prices at Georgetown University here in D.C. 1 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is interviewed about U.S. foreign policy by Foreign Affairs magazine. It's all live on Wednesday on C-SPAN Radio. Just tell your smart speaker, play C-SPAN Radio.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. Some news from thehill.com. House Democrats wasting no time taking up gun violence legislation following last week's school massacre in Texas, scheduling a special session of the House Judiciary Committee on Thursday to send a slate of tougher firearms laws to the chamber floor. Some of the proposals considered at the emergency markup: bills to curb gun trafficking, promote the safe storage of firearms, and raise the eligible purchase age for certain semi-automatic rifles. The meeting scheduled even though the House of Representatives is not in session this week. Senate also out this week, but a bipartisan group of senators are meeting virtually to see if common ground on gun regulations and laws can be found. Senator John Cornyn, Republican of Texas, telling reporters on Monday about the virtual meeting today.
Senator, you're viewed as one of the Republicans who might actually be willing to have fruitful discussions with Democrats about gun reform measures in the coming weeks. Is that something you plan to do?
I will do as I've always done, and that is try to lean forward and meet my colleagues across the aisle halfway, particularly on matters involving the seriousness and gravity that this does. You may have heard that Senator McConnell, who's the Republican leader in the Senate, asked me to lead some of those discussions. We're already having those discussions in person and on the phone, and look forward to meeting on Tuesday through a Zoom call to try to see if we can agree on a basic framework about how we go forward. One thing I hope does not happen is that the various parties sort of fall back into their typical talking points. I hope we will try to look in a clear-eyed way at what happened and ask this question: what can we do to fix this problem? And if we can't fix it, what can we do to make it better? We did that after Sutherland Springs, and I think in the process have saved lives. And I think the same process should apply here.
Republican Senator John Cornyn in San Antonio, Texas on Monday. He also told reporters at this news conference what his starting position is going into the negotiations with Democrats.
Everybody's got their talking points down when it comes to issues involving guns. My firm belief is that the Second Amendment protects the rights of all law-abiding citizens to keep and bear arms, and we start from that premise. But when young men who obviously are mentally ill, with their records basically protected because they are just turning of age, so the juvenile records are not available to us, either in terms of mental health treatments or police activity. I think this is a sign to us that we need to do a lot more than we have done in the past. First and foremost is keep guns out of the hands of people who are mentally ill or criminals. To me, that should be a point of consensus. Of course, the problem you have here is when somebody's 18 and comes of age, he was able to take a background check and pass that background check because there was no information indicating he either had a criminal record or had mental health issues, so to speak. But I think we also need to look at some of the school safety measures. Obviously, there was a failure point there where the door was basically propped open and he was able to gain ready access to the school. And then, obviously, in small towns like Uvalde, they don't have the resources for training for law enforcement and first responders that perhaps larger areas like San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston do. And so we need to look at where the deficiencies of training may be for our first responders so they can try to do everything they can using the very best practices to try to intervene and to stop the killing and to stop the dying. After Columbine High School, the protocols changed dramatically to an active shooter protocol, but we need to find out more about what the law enforcement officers need and what they actually, the kind of training they get to be prepared for these in the future. And then I think what this discloses is, frankly, the breakdown of our mental health treatment system in this country. Years ago, people with mental illness were institutionalized, and that was later disregarded, believing that local community mental health care would be widely available, which it has not been. And this young man, the shooter, was sending out all sorts of signs, and they were largely ignored, either because of a broken family life, because of the isolation of COVID-19, where he was out of school for 2 years, basically in his home alone playing violent video games. And so there's a lot of lessons to be learned.
Senator John Cornyn, Republican from Texas, news conference in San Antonio, Texas on Monday. The lead senator on the Democratic side in these talks, Chris Murphy of Connecticut, tweeting Monday as well, been on the phone today with Republican and Democratic senators trying to find the common denominator on a gun violence bill. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer has given us just over a week to find a compromise. This time, failure cannot be an option. And again, it was confirmed from John Cornyn that the senator is meeting virtually today, Tuesday. Republican Governor of Arkansas, Asa Hutchinson, saying that he would like to see a similar bipartisan effort among governors to find common ground on the gun issue. And he tells CNN today that he may support raising the minimum age to buy the type of semi-automatic rifle used in the Uvalde, Texas shooting, the AR-15 style. The shooter bought that firearm legally after he turned 18 years old.
There's this bipartisan meeting today, and the word that we use there is common ground. So I'm wondering, what's the one area, and I'm talking about guns here, not as much as schools, what's the one area on gun safety where you think there could be common ground?
Well, first of all, I think you've got to be able to talk about the AR-15 style weapons and whether that's an 18 or 21 age. You have to at least have a conversation about that. That's tough because the challenge with the gun safety discussion is what makes a difference. And whenever you look at what might make a difference, it's hard to come up with a solution. And that's why you cannot just simply focus on a gun safety discussion. It's got to also be about investment in higher levels of school safety. Now, it didn't work very well in Uvalde, but they didn't follow the guidebook either, and what it appears to be. And so that's an extraordinary tragedy that's driving the discussion today as it should. But I hope that the senators, first of all, I applaud them for meeting together. As a governor, America wants to see, in a bipartisan way, this kind of discussion going on, looking for solutions that make a difference. I hope to be able to mirror that as a governor, and that we can have a bipartisan working group of governors also looking at this issue and how we can do better for our children.
Governor Asa Hutchinson, Republican from Arkansas, with CNN's John Berman this morning. President Biden visited Uvalde, Texas over the weekend. Today, he spoke about it as he met in the White House Oval Office with the visiting Prime Minister of New Zealand.
An expression by an Irish poet is, "Too long a suffering makes a stone of the heart." Well, there's an awful lot of suffering. I've been to more mass shooting aftermaths than I think any president in American history, unfortunately. And it's just so much of it is preventable, and the devastation is amazing. Yesterday, or not the day before, I was down in Texas, and people sat in a room, about 250 of them in a large room, with me for almost 4 hours. Nobody left. They wanted to air till I spoke to every single person in that room. Every single person. They waited till the very end. And the pain is palpable.
President Biden in the White House Oval Office. At the end of this meeting with New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, President Biden was asked whether he would meet with the Senate Minority Leader, Republican Mitch McConnell, about gun legislation. The president responded, "I will meet with the Congress on guns." Here it is. It's a little difficult to hear, though. President promising to meet with Congress on guns. There was a follow-up question about when that would happen. He did not answer. It took just one mass shooting in New Zealand for that country to ban the AR-15 semi-automatic rifle. It was in 2019. A white supremacist shot and killed 51 worshippers at 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand. Today, in the White House Oval Office, the Prime Minister talking about gun control.
We are in an incredibly difficult international environment, but also domestically it is extraordinarily challenging as well. And can I bring the sincere condolences of the people of Aotearoa, New Zealand, for what you have experienced in Texas and in New York, and it's been devastating to see the impact on those communities. Our experience, of course, in this regard is our own, but if there is anything that we can share that would be of any value, we are here to share it.
Well, the work you're doing with the tech companies is really important, and I want to work with you there as well.
And I absolutely look forward to updating you on some of the conversations we've had this week, because I hold hope that we can make progress.
Prime Minister of New Zealand with President Biden in the White House Oval Office, referring to work with tech companies. She's working on dealing with disinformation online. Time magazine writes that in June 2020, New Zealand, nation of 5 million people, tightened gun laws further, introducing a new firearms registry to track the buying and selling of weapons, shorter licenses for first-time license holders, and a ban on a wider variety of guns. Only time will tell the true impact of the legislation. Recorded firearm-related offenses actually increased in 2020, but gun control advocates say this reflects the police taking gun crime more seriously. That from Time magazine. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau seeking new gun control legislation, including a freeze on the number of handguns in the country. Trudeau making that announcement on Monday. And today, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre asked whether President Biden might consider something similar.
Canada is making it impossible to buy, sell, transfer, or import handguns anywhere in that country. Would President Biden ever consider a similar restriction on handguns here?
So, we'll leave it up to other countries to set their policy on gun ownership. The president has made his position clear. The United States needs to act, as I just laid out. He supports a ban on sale of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, and expanded background checks to keep guns out of the dangerous hands. He does not support a ban on the sale of all handguns, to answer your question.
Okay, thank you.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, part of today's briefing. Joining her at today's briefing, as well as meeting with President Biden, the Korean K-pop musical supergroup BTS. CNN reports that it's a visit aimed at discussing Asian inclusion and representation and addressing anti-Asian hate crimes and disinformation. The article from CNN goes on. Last year, amid a spate of anti-Asian hate crimes in the U.S., including shootings at 3 Atlanta area spas, BTS spoke out about their own experience and discrimination. Leading off in making the statements, band member known as RM. He did speak English.
Hi, we're BTS, and it is a great honor to be invited to the White House today to discuss the important issues of anti-Asian hate crimes, Asian inclusion, and diversity.
After that open, the other members of BTS spoke in Korean, and then after that, their remarks were interpreted at the end in a group.
Jun said today is the last day of the AA and HPI Heritage Month. We joined the White House to stand with the AA and HPI community and to celebrate. Jimmy said we were devastated by the recent surge of hate crimes, including Asian American hate crimes. To put a stop on this and support the cause, we'd like to take this opportunity to voice ourselves once again. J-Hope said we are here today thanks to our army, our fans worldwide, who have different nationalities and cultures and use different languages. We are truly and always grateful. Jungkook said, we still feel surprised that music created by South Korean artists reaches so many people around the world, transcending languages and cultural barriers. We believe music is always an amazing and wonderful unifier of all things. Shiga said it's not wrong to be different. I think equality begins when we open up and embrace all of our differences. B said everyone has their own history. We hope today is one step forward to respecting and understanding each and every one as a valuable person.
The interpreter for the members of the musical group BTS in the White House briefing room, and then the last speaker was the same as the first speaker, band member RM.
And lastly, we thank President Biden and the White House for giving this important opportunity to speak about the important causes, remind ourselves of what we can do as artists. Once again, thank you very much.
As this was getting underway, USA Today's White House reporter Joey Garrison tweeting, the White House YouTube page typically gets a few hundred viewers for White House press briefings. Right now, there are 196,000 viewers and counting. As BTS soon takes the podium, there's remarkable interest in this. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Get more top Washington stories sent to you every day by subscribing to C-SPAN's evening newsletter Word for Word. Sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.